Chapter 11. The Witch Hunter's Arrival. The chill of early morning lingered in the air as Hendrik sat in the corner of the Howling Hound, the small village inn in Wolfsback. The warmth of the hearth was a welcome reprieve after his harrowing escape from Castle Orlock, but it did little to ease the growing weight of his thoughts. Nyklas von Carstein. A vampire. The word felt absurd even as it sat at the forefront of Hendrik's mind, but the evidence left little room for doubt. And yet, what could he, a mere scholar, do against such a creature? The villagers had spoken of their fear, their helplessness. Hendrik now shared that dread, though he refused to let it paralyze him. If the Church of Sigmar had sent him here, there must have been some purpose beyond mere observation. The door to the inn creaked open, and the faint sound of boots on the wooden floor pulled Hendrik from his thoughts. He turned to see a tall figure stepping inside, silhouetted against the gray morning light. The man wore a wide-brimmed hat and a long coat that swept the ground as he moved. The distinctive twin-tailed comet of Sigmar gleamed on a heavy medallion at his chest, and a pistol and rapier hung from his belt. His sharp eyes scanned the room, landing on Hendrik with an intensity that made him freeze. The Witch Hunter. The man strode across the room, his boots heavy against the creaking floorboards. As he approached, Hendrik noticed the scar running diagonally across his face, a jagged mark that lent his stern expression an even grimmer edge. "You," the man said, his voice low and commanding. "You're the scholar from Altdorf, aren't you?" "I am," Hendrik replied, forcing himself to meet the man's gaze. "And you are?" "Lukas Dietrich, Witch Hunter of the Church of Sigmar." He didn't extend his hand. "I've been tracking a trail of death through Sylvania. The last lead I followed brought me here. What do you know about the disappearances?" Hendrik hesitated, weighing his words carefully. Witch hunters were notoriously ruthless, their zeal for rooting out heresy often leading them to act before fully understanding a situation. The last thing Hendrik needed was to be mistaken for an enemy. "I know they are connected to Baron Nyklas von Carstein," Hendrik said carefully. "I believe he is responsible for what's happening here." Lukas's eyes narrowed. "You believe, or you know?" "I've seen things that defy explanation," Hendrik admitted. "The Baron's servants, they aren't human. And there are signs of something darker within the castle. The villagers believe him to be a vampire." For a long moment, Lukas said nothing. Then he pulled out a chair and sat across from Hendrik, his movements deliberate. "If the Baron is a vampire, why are you still alive? Thralls don't often get the luxury of roaming free." Hendrik stiffened. "I am no thrall." "Forgive me if I don't take you at your word," Lukas said coldly. "Nyklas von Carstein is a name I've heard whispered by the survivors of his wake. If you've come from his castle, you've been in his presence. That alone is enough to warrant suspicion." "I escaped," Hendrik said firmly. "If I were under his control, why would I be here? Why would I warn the villagers?" "Perhaps to lure them into his grasp," Lukas countered. His hand rested on the hilt of his rapier, his fingers drumming against the pommel. "Vampires are cunning. They use pawns to spread their influence. You might not even know you're one of them." Hendrik's patience was wearing thin. "If I were a thrall, I'd hardly be sitting here explaining myself. I came to Wolfsbach to uncover the truth, just as you have." Lukas studied him, his gaze sharp and unwavering. At last he leaned back in his chair, though his hand remained on the rapier. "If you're lying, I'll know soon enough. But for now, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt." "Generous of you," Hendrik muttered, his relief tempered by annoyance. The growing threat. The tension between them eased slightly as they began to share information. Hendrik recounted his findings at Castle Orlock, the eerie silence of the servants, the horrific scene in the crypt, and Nyklas's unsettling charm. Lukas listened intently, his expression growing darker with each detail. "The signs are clear," Lukas said when Hendrik finished. "Nyklas is no mere man. His lineage, his behavior, and the fear he commands, it all points to one thing. He is a von Carstein." "A von Carstein?" Hendrik repeated, unfamiliar with the name. "The von Carsteins are a cursed bloodline," Lukas explained. "Vampires of great power and ambition. Sylvania has been their hunting ground for centuries. Most are long dead, but their legacy remains. He paused, his jaw tightening. And those who remain are as dangerous as their forebears. Hendrik felt a chill run down his spine. If Nyklas is truly one of them, what can we do? We destroy him, Lukas said simply. But that's easier said than done. Vampires don't die easily, especially not those of the von Carstein bloodline. They have powers beyond mortal understanding, control over the undead, regeneration, and an array of dark magic. To face one unprepared is to court death. Then we must prepare, Hendrik said. I've seen enough to know that Nyklas is growing bolder. If we don't act, he'll claim more lives. Agreed, Lukas said, rising from his seat. We'll need weapons, silver fire, holy artifacts, and information. If Nyklas has a weakness, we must find it. An easy alliance. As they left the inn, the villagers watched from a distance, their fear evident in their wary gazes. Hendrik couldn't blame them. They had lived under Nyklas's shadow for generations, their lives shaped by his silent dominion. But with Lukas's arrival, a flicker of hope stirred in their eyes. Keep watch over the village, Lukas instructed Otto before turning to Hendrik. I'll scout the area for signs of Nyklas's influence. You'll assist me. If you're as knowledgeable as you claim, you might be useful. And if I'm not, Hendrik asked dryly. Then I'll kill you myself, Lukas said without hesitation. Hendrik stared at him, uncertain if the witch hunter was joking. But there was no humor in Lukas's expression, only grim resolve. Hendrik nodded, accepting the reality of their uneasy partnership. They had a common enemy, and for now, that would have to be enough. As they set out together, Hendrik couldn't help but glance toward the distant silhouette of Castle Orlock. The spires of the fortress rose against the horizon like jagged teeth, a reminder of the darkness that awaited them. Nyklas von Carstein, Lukas muttered under his breath. Your time is coming. Hendrik hoped the witch hunter was right. But as they ventured into the cursed land of Sylvania, he couldn't shake the feeling that the Baron was already several steps ahead. Chapter 12. The Sigmarite Refuge. The ruined chapel stood at the edge of the village, half shrouded in mist. Its crooked steeple leaned precariously to one side, and the stone walls were cracked and weathered, vines creeping through the gaps like invasive fingers. The twin-tailed comet of Sigmar, though tarnished and missing chunks of its form, still hung defiantly above the arched doorway, its presence a faint reminder of hope in an otherwise desolate place. This is the refuge, Hendrik asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. It's more than it seems, Lukas Dietrich replied, striding toward the entrance. Father Albrecht has served Sigmar longer than most of us have been alive. If anyone knows the truth about Nyklas von Carstein, it's him. Hendrik followed reluctantly, his gaze sweeping over the crumbling structure. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of melted tallow and aged incense. Candles flickered in their holders along the walls, their weak flames barely illuminating the space. At the far end of the chapel, an elderly man knelt before the altar, his back bent in fervent prayer. The aged priest, Father Albrecht, Lukas called, his voice low but commanding. The old priest turned, revealing a weathered face lined with age and burden. His hands, calloused and trembling, clutched a well-worn hammer pendant, the sacred symbol of Sigmar. Lukas, the priest said, rising slowly to his feet. His voice was raspy but firm. I feared you would come too late. Albrecht's gaze shifted to Hendrik, narrowing slightly. And this one, a scholar. Sent by the church, Lukas said curtly. He's seen what we're dealing with. The priest studied Hendrik for a long moment before nodding. Then perhaps Sigmar has not abandoned us yet. Albrecht gestured for them to sit on the wooden benches near the altar. The room was sparse, its once grand tapestries reduced to tattered remnants, but the sense of sanctity remained. The altar itself was carved from stone, etched with faded inscriptions invoking Sigmar's protection. You know of Nyklas von Carstein? Lukas said without preamble. Albrecht sighed heavily, lowering himself onto the bench. Nyklas, yes, a name that brings shame to these lands. The von Carstein legacy. Nyklas is of the von Carstein bloodline. Albrecht began, his voice carrying the weight of years. But compared to the infamous lords of his house, he is a lesser figure. Not a Vlad, nor a Conrad, nor even a Manfred. He does not wield armies or seek dominion over empires. But make no mistake, he is no less dangerous. What makes him different? Hendrik asked, leaning forward. Ambition, Albrecht replied, his gaze distant. Nyklas has always been patient, cunning. He does not seek open war, but influence. He builds his strength in the shadows, feeding off the people's fear and despair. And unlike the others, he cares for no legacy but his own. His loyalty to the von Carstein name is tenuous at best. Then why haven't the other vampires dealt with him? Lukas asked, his tone sharp. The von Carsteins don't tolerate competition. Perhaps because he is insignificant in their eyes, Albrecht said. Or perhaps because they do not know his plans. Nyklas has long preferred to keep to himself, building power in this forgotten corner of Sylvania. But there are whispers, rumors that he seeks an artifact, one that could elevate him beyond even the likes of Vlad or Manfred. Hendrik felt a chill run down his spine. An artifact? What kind? The villagers call it the Soulstone of Lahmia, Albrecht said grimly. A relic of the first vampires, said to hold the essence of their cursed power. If Nyklas has found it, or even come close to it, the consequences could be catastrophic. A moment of doubt. Hendrik glanced at Lukas, who was silent, his expression grim. If Nyklas is building his strength, Hendrik said, and if he has access to such a relic, how do we stop him? We stop him the way we always do, Lukas said coldly, with fire and faith. Albrecht shook his head slowly. It is not so simple. Vampires of the von Carstein bloodline cannot be killed by mortal means. Even if you pierce his heart, he will rise again, unless the proper rites are performed. Then what do you suggest? Lukas asked, his voice laced with impatience. Nyklas's connection to his power must be severed, Albrecht said. Destroy the Soulstone, and you weaken him. Only then can he be truly destroyed. But to do that, he hesitated, his hands tightening around the hammer pendant. You would have to return to Castle Orlock. Hendrik's stomach churned at the thought. The crypt, the servants, the oppressive darkness. It was the last place he wanted to go. But as Albrecht's words sank in, he realized there was no alternative. Is there anything else you can tell us about the Soulstone? Hendrik asked. Only that it is bound to the castle, Albrecht replied. Legends say it was brought there centuries ago, hidden deep within its vaults. Its power feeds the land, corrupting it, and in turn, feeds Nyklas. A plan forms. Lukas rose from the bench, his hand resting on the hilt of his rapier. Then we know what must be done. We find the Soulstone and destroy it. And how do you propose we get past Nyklas and his thralls? Hendrik asked, his voice rising with frustration. We barely escaped last time. Lukas turned to him, his expression cold. We prepare. Albrecht has the blessings and relics we need, and this time we don't run. Albrecht nodded, though his face was heavy with concern. I will do what I can to aid you. Sigmar's light will be your shield, but you must tread carefully. Nyklas is no fool. He will know you are coming. Hendrik felt the weight of the task ahead pressing down on him, heavier than anything he had faced before. He glanced at the worn altar, its inscriptions barely visible in the dim light, and drew a deep breath. If Nyklas has the Soulstone, Hendrik said, his voice steady despite his fear, then we cannot allow him to keep it. Whatever it takes, we stop him. Whatever it takes, Lukas echoed. As they left the chapel, the faint sound of Albrecht's prayers followed them into the misty air. The priest knelt once more before the altar, his voice rising in solemn invocation. Sigmar protect them, he murmured, his hammer pendant glinting faintly in the candlelight, and may his light guide them through the darkness. Chapter 13. Nyklas's Plans. The candlelight in the chapel flickered as Father Albrecht leaned forward, his weathered hands resting on the altar. The air was heavy with incense and the weight of what he was about to reveal. Hendrik and Lukas Dietrich stood before him, their expressions tense, the gravity of their task hanging heavily between them. You spoke of the Soulstone of Lahmia, Hendrik said, breaking the silence. If it's as powerful as you claim, why would Nyklas pursue something so dangerous? Surely he risks drawing the attention of others, even his own kind. Albrecht sighed deeply, his gaze fixed on the twin-tailed comet etched into the altar. Nyklas has never been like the other von Carsteins, he began. The great lords of his bloodline, Vlad Manfred, they sought open conquest, the subjugation of empires. Nyklas, however, has always preferred subtlety. He operates in the shadows, influencing rather than conquering outright. But the Soulstone changes everything. The Soulstone of Lahmia. What exactly is this artifact? Lukas asked, his tone sharp and impatient. You said it amplifies his power. But what does that mean? The Soulstone of Lahmia, Albrecht said, is a relic tied to the origin of vampirism itself. It is said to have been created by the first vampires, the disciples of Queen Neferata, using the dark magic of Nagash. It holds a fragment of the power they wielded, a link to the dark magic that sustains the undead. He paused, his voice lowering. For someone like Nyklas, the Soulstone is more than a weapon. It is a gateway. With it, he can amplify his necromantic powers far beyond their natural limits. He could raise armies of the dead with a mere thought, dominate the will of mortals, and even defy the few weaknesses his kind still possess. Lukas frowned. And if he has already found it? Then his strength will only grow, Albrecht said grimly, and his ambitions will not stop at Sylvania. Nyklas's vision. Hendrik's breath caught. You're saying he plans to leave Sylvania? Albrecht nodded. The von Carsteins have long ruled this cursed land, content to let the rest of the empire forget them. But Nyklas seeks more. He has no interest in the grand battles and open wars of his ancestors. He would see the empire fall from within, one village, one province, one soul at a time. He would spread his corruption like a plague, leaving no corner untouched. Lukas's hand rested on the hilt of his rapier, his expression dark, and the Soulstone gives him the power to do it. Yes, Albrecht said. And worse still, it is tied to Castle Orlock itself. The legends say the stone was brought there centuries ago, hidden in its deepest vaults by one of Nyklas's ancestors. Its power has seeped into the land, corrupting it, and Nyklas has spent decades searching for it. But if the legends are true, Hendrik interjected, why didn't Nyklas use the Soulstone before now? Because the stone is dormant, Albrecht explained. Its power must be awakened through a ritual, one that requires great preparation and sacrifice. I fear that Nyklas is nearing the end of that preparation. If he succeeds, the Soulstone will not only empower him, it will anchor his dominion over death itself. A growing threat. The room fell silent as the weight of Albrecht's words settled over them. Hendrik's mind raced, piecing together the implications. The disappearances in Wolfsback, the pale and hollow servants of Castle Orlock, the blood-drained livestock, it all pointed to a single, horrifying conclusion. The disappearances, Hendrik said slowly, his voice tight. They're part of the ritual, aren't they? Albrecht nodded. The Soulstone feeds on death, but not just any death. The victims must be drained of their vitality, their life force consumed to fuel its power. Nyklas has been using the villagers as sacrifices. Then we have no time to waste, Lukas said, his voice hard. If he's close to completing the ritual, we must act now. Hendrik hesitated. But how? We barely escaped the castle last time. Even if we find the Soulstone, how do we destroy it? Albrecht turned to the altar, his hands trembling as he lifted a small, iron-bound chest from beneath it. He set it on the stone surface and opened it, revealing a weathered hammer engraved with intricate runes. The symbol of the twin-tailed comet gleamed faintly in the dim light. This, he said, lifting the hammer carefully, is Sigmar's light. It was blessed by the high priest centuries ago, a weapon forged to destroy the unholy. It can shatter the Soulstone, severing its connection to the mortal realm. Hendrik reached out to touch the hammer, but Albrecht stopped him. It is not enough to merely strike the stone, the priest said. The blow must be delivered at a place of sanctity, a site where Sigmar's light can pierce the darkness. That is the only way to ensure the Soulstone's destruction. The plan forms. Castle Orlock is the last place anyone would call sanctified, Lukas said bitterly. There is one place, Albrecht said. The crypt of Sigmar, hidden beneath the ruins of an ancient chapel near Castle Orlock. It is said to be a holy site, blessed by Sigmar himself. If you can reach it, you can destroy the Soulstone. And what of Nyklas? Hendrik asked. He won't let us take it without a fight. Nyklas will be weakened if the Soulstone is removed from his grasp, Albrecht said, but he will still be dangerous. You must be prepared to face him. Silver, holy water, and this hammer, these are your only weapons against him. A final warning. As they prepared to leave, Albrecht placed a hand on Hendrik's shoulder. You must understand, this will not be an easy task. Nyklas is cunning, and he will know you are coming. The closer you get to the Soulstone, the more his power will grow. You must have faith, Master Falk. Sigmar's light will guide you. Hendrik nodded, though his heart was heavy with doubt. Faith had never been his strongest virtue, but he knew that without it, they had little hope of succeeding. Lukas slung his weapons over his shoulder, his expression grim. We go at first light. If we wait any longer, there won't be a village left to save. As they left the chapel, the ruins loomed behind them, a fragile sanctuary in the midst of a cursed land. The path ahead was treacherous, the stakes higher than Hendrik could have imagined. But one thing was certain, Nyklas von Carstein's plans could not be allowed to come to fruition. And as the first stars appeared in the darkened sky, Hendrik steeled himself for the battle ahead. Chapter 14. Nyklas's Reach. The early morning mist clung to the fields and forests surrounding Wolfsbach as Hendrik, Lukas, and Father Albrecht prepared to investigate the rumors spreading through the region. Word of entire villages disappearing had reached them in hushed whispers from the villagers, alongside tales of unnatural creatures roaming the woods and fields. The evidence suggested one thing. Nyklas von Carstein was no longer content with hiding in the shadows. He's mobilizing, Lukas said as they walked the narrow, rutted path leading toward one of the nearby villages. His tone was grim, and his hand rested on the hilt of his rapier. This is no longer about sacrifices for the Soulstone. Nyklas is preparing for war. But why now? Hendrik asked. He's lived in relative obscurity for decades. Why reveal himself now, just as the Soulstone nears completion? Because once it's active, he'll have no need for secrecy, Lukas replied. And by the time we realize his full strength, it will be too late. Father Albrecht walked behind them, his hammer pendant clutched tightly in his hand. Nyklas's power is tied to fear. The disappearances, the undead, they're not just practical. They're meant to break the will of the people. The empty village. Their first stop was Eichenhof, a small farming village nestled at the edge of the forest. When they arrived, the silence was deafening. The fields lay fallow, the crops withering as if drained of life. The houses stood intact, their doors ajar and windows dark. This place should be bustling, Hendrik said, his voice hushed. It's harvest season. Stay close, Lukas ordered, drawing his pistol. He led the group into the village square, his sharp eyes scanning every shadow. The scene was eerily familiar to Hendrik, reminiscent of the abandoned farmstead he had investigated weeks earlier. Tools lay scattered in the dirt, carts overturned, and the faint smell of decay lingered in the air. They approached the village well, its rope frayed and dangling, as if someone had tried to climb down. Lukas knelt, inspecting the ground. Tracks, he said, boots, leading toward the forest. And these? Hendrik asked, pointing to another set of prints. They were larger, clawed, and partially embedded in the soft earth. Hendrik felt a chill run down his spine. Those aren't human. No, Lukas said grimly. They're not. Father Albrecht moved to one of the houses and stepped inside cautiously. Moments later, he called out, "Come quickly." Hendrik and Lukas followed him into the house, their lanterns illuminating the dark interior. A family of 4 sat at the dinner table, their bodies slumped as if asleep. But their skin was pale and waxy, and their eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling. They weren't killed, Hendrik whispered, his voice trembling. It's like they were, drained. Nyklas is doing, Albrecht said solemnly. He doesn't need to kill his victims outright. Sometimes he takes just enough to leave them like this, soulless husks. Lukas examined the bodies carefully. This isn't just about feeding, he's leaving a message. The forest of undeath. As they followed the tracks into the forest, the air grew colder, the trees pressing closer together, as though trying to block out the light. The ground was littered with broken branches and trampled undergrowth, signs of something large moving through the area. Hendrik clutched his satchel tightly, his fingers brushing against the holy relics Father Albrecht had given him. The uneasy he had felt since entering Sylvania was now a constant presence, gnawing at the edges of his resolve. The first sign of the undead came as they approached a clearing. A low growl echoed through the trees, followed by the unmistakable shuffle of feet on dry leaves. Lukas raised a hand, signaling them to stop. Ahead, a figure staggered into view, a man in tattered clothing, his head lolling at an unnatural angle. His skin was ashen, his movements jerky, and his eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. "Sigmar preserve us," Albrecht muttered. Lukas didn't hesitate. He raised his pistol and fired, the shot echoing through the forest. The zombie collapsed to the ground, a gaping hole where its head had been. "Keep moving," Lukas said, reloading his pistol with practiced ease. "That won't be the only one." He was right. As they pushed deeper into the forest, more undead emerged from the shadows, men, women, and even children, their lifeless bodies animated by Nyklas's dark magic. Some stumbled toward them clumsily, while others moved with disturbing speed, their jaws snapping as they lunged. Hendrik swung his lantern wildly, the flame flickering as he struggled to keep them at bay. Albrecht recited prayers, his voice rising as he held his hammer pendant high. The holy symbol glowed faintly, the power of Sigmar repelling the undead long enough for Lukas to cut them down. "Why so many?" Hendrik asked, panting as they stopped to catch their breath. "Nyklas must know we're coming." "He doesn't care," Lukas said, his face grim. "This isn't about us. He's raising an army." The monstrosities. As they emerged from the forest into a large clearing, the sight before them stopped them cold. The clearing was filled with corpses, not just human, but animal as well. Wolves, deer, and even livestock lay scattered across the ground, their bodies broken and twisted. Yet they weren't still. Their limbs twitched, their heads jerked, and their eyes glowed faintly with an unnatural light. Nyklas's magic was animating them into grotesque monstrosities, their bodies reshaped into forms designed for battle. A wolf with elongated claws and exposed bones snarled at them, its spine arching unnaturally. A deer with sharpened antlers charged, its movements erratic but unnervingly fast. "They're experiments," Hendrik said, horrified. "Nyklas is testing his power." Lukas raised his rapier, his expression hard. "Then we end this now." The clearing erupted into chaos as the monstrosities attacked. Lukas moved with precision, his blade flashing, as he struck down one creature after another. Albrecht's prayers filled the air, the light from his hammer pendant burning away the unholy energy animating the creatures. Hendrik fought to stay out of reach, using his lantern to blind and disorient the attackers. When the last creature fell, the clearing was silent once more, save for the sound of their labored breathing. The bodies lay in heaps, their corrupted forms slowly disintegrating into ash. A grim revelation. As they regrouped, Lukas inspected one of the corpses. "These are just scouts," he said. "Nyklas is testing his strength, but he hasn't unleashed his full force yet." "And when he does?" Hendrik asked, his voice heavy with dread. "Then Sylvania will burn," Lukas said. "And if he crosses the border into the Empire, the devastation will be unimaginable." Albrecht knelt beside one of the bodies, his face pale. "The Soulstone amplifies his power, yes, but it also amplifies his reach. These creatures are just the beginning. If Nyklas completes the ritual, he could raise the dead across all of Sylvania and beyond." Hendrik felt a wave of nausea, the enormity of their task settling over him like a weight. They weren't just fighting to stop Nyklas. They were fighting to prevent an apocalypse. "Then we have no choice," Hendrik said. "We must destroy the Soulstone before it's too late." Lukas nodded, his jaw set. Then we prepare. This isn't a battle we can afford to lose. As they made their way back to Wolfsback, the distant silhouette of Castle Orlock loomed on the horizon, its jagged spires a reminder of the darkness waiting for them. Hendrik clenched his fists, his fear now tempered by a growing resolve. Nyklas's reach had to be stopped, no matter the cost. Chapter 15. Into the Wyrdwood. The Wyrdwood loomed before them, its gnarled trees twisting together like the ribs of some ancient beast. The forest exhaled a palpable sense of dread, the air within unnaturally cold and thick with the smell of decaying leaves. Hendrik hesitated at the edge, the shadowy depths of the cursed woods seeming to shift and writhe as if alive. "This place has a reputation for swallowing men whole," Hendrik said, his voice low. "Are we certain the relic is worth the risk?" "It's not a matter of worth," Father Albrecht replied, clutching his hammer pendant tightly. "If we are to face Nyklas, we need every advantage. The Lantern of Sanctity was blessed by Sigmar himself. Its light can repel darkness, even that which no mortal weapon can touch." "And if it isn't there?" Hendrik asked. "Then we'll die with nothing to show for it," Lukas Dietrich said bluntly. "Now move." Hendrik cast a wary glance at the witch hunter before stepping into the forest. The ancient, twisting trees closed in around them, their branches clawing at the sky and blotting out the sunlight. The faint, eerie whisper of wind moved through the leaves, though the air itself was still. The forest's curse. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the forest became. The trees grew thicker, their trunks covered in strange, glowing fungi. The ground was soft and spongy, the undergrowth littered with bones, animal and otherwise. Hendrik's lantern provided little comfort, its flickering light casting distorted shadows that seemed to reach out toward them. "What exactly are we looking for?" Hendrik asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The lantern will be in a shrine," Albrecht said, his eyes scanning the darkness. "It was built centuries ago to protect the relic. But the Wyrdwood is alive. It will not give it up easily." As if on cue, a low groan reverberated through the forest, the sound like the creaking of ancient wood. Hendrik froze, his heart pounding as he searched the darkness for the source. The groan grew louder, turning into a guttural, inhuman growl. "Stay close," Lukas ordered, drawing his rapier. "The forest is watching us." Hendrik's hand tightened around the handle of his lantern as they pressed forward, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the spongy earth. The growling faded, but the forest's oppressive presence only seemed to intensify. The spirits awaken. After what felt like hours of navigating the twisting paths, they came upon a clearing. At its center stood a crumbling stone shrine, its surface covered in moss and engraved with faded runes. Atop the altar sat a lantern of intricate design, its golden frame glowing faintly with an inner light. "The Lantern of Sanctity," Albrecht breathed, stepping forward. But as they moved closer, the air grew colder, and a strange mist began to seep from the ground. Hendrik felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise as whispers filled the air, unintelligible and echoing, as though spoken by 100 voices at once. "Something's coming," Lukas warned, his pistol drawn. The mist coalesced into shapes, vague humanoid figures with hollow eyes and twisted limbs. Their movements were jerky, as if they were being pulled by invisible strings, and their forms flickered like candlelight. "Spirits," Albrecht said, his voice firm, corrupted by the forest's curse. The spirits surged forward, their whispering voices rising into a deafening wail. Lukas fired his pistol, the shot tearing through one of the figures, but it reformed almost instantly. Hendrik swung his lantern wildly, its light scattering the spirits temporarily, but they pressed on, undeterred. "Sigmar, guide us," Albrecht shouted, holding his hammer pendant aloft. It glowed with a brilliant golden light, the spirits recoiling as the holy power washed over them. But the glow began to fade, and Albrecht staggered under the effort. "We can't hold them off forever," Hendrik shouted. "Get the lantern." Claiming the relic. Lukas darted forward, his movements precise as he cut through the spirits blocking his path. He reached the shrine and grabbed the lantern, its golden glow intensifying as his hand closed around it. The spirits howled in pain, their forms flickering violently. "Go! Now!" Lukas shouted, brandishing the lantern as the spirits writhed and clawed at him. Hendrik and Albrecht rushed to his side, the light of the lantern creating a protective barrier around them. Together, they retreated toward the edge of the clearing, the spirits' howls fading as the relic's power drove them back. But the forest wasn't finished with them. The ground trembled, and the trees seemed to shift, their branches twisting into claw-like shapes. The path they had entered through was gone, replaced by a tangle of roots and thorns. "We're trapped," Hendrik said, his voice rising with panic. "No," Lukas said, holding the lantern high. Its light pierced the darkness, revealing a narrow, winding path through the trees. "This way." A narrow escape. The trio ran, the light of the lantern carving a path through the forest's cursed embrace. The whispers grew louder, the spirits reappearing at the edges of the light, but they dared not approach. The ground beneath their feet seemed to shift and ripple, and Hendrik stumbled more than once, his breath ragged as he struggled to keep up. At last they broke through the tree line, the oppressive weight of the Wyrdwood lifting as they emerged into the open air. Hendrik collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath, while Lukas and Albrecht turned to face the forest. The spirits lingered at the edge, their hollow eyes watching, but they did not cross into the light of the lantern. "Sigmar preserve us," Albrecht whispered, his voice heavy with relief. Hendrik rose shakily to his feet, his hands trembling. That was not natural. "Nothing in Sylvania is," Lukas said, his voice hard. He held up the lantern, its glow steady and strong. "But now we have this. Nyklas's magic won't be able to touch us as long as we wield it." "And yet the forest let us go," Hendrik said, his brow furrowed. "Why?" Lukas didn't answer, his eyes fixed on the distant silhouette of Castle Orlock. The lantern's light reflected in his sharp gaze, its golden glow a faint beacon against the encroaching darkness. "Whatever the reason," Lukas said, "this was only the beginning." As they began their trek back to Wolfsback, the Wyrdwood loomed behind them, its cursed whispers fading into silence. The lantern of sanctity was theirs, but the cost of wielding it, and the dangers they still faced, remained uncertain. Chapter 16. A Town Under Siege. The distant sound of a tolling bell reached them as they approached the outskirts of Dunkelwald, the town shrouded in the haze of dusk. Hendrik quickened his pace, his eyes narrowing as he noticed faint wisps of smoke rising above the rooftops. The bell's rhythmic clang was accompanied by muffled shouts and the unmistakable clash of steel. "This isn't a drill," Lukas Dietrich said grimly, drawing his rapier and pistol. "The town's under attack." "What could Nyklas hope to gain from attacking a place like this?" Hendrik asked, his breath quickening. "Fear," Father Albrecht said, his hammer pendant clutched tightly in one hand. "Fear and chaos. If the people lose hope, Nyklas doesn't need to fight them. They'll hand themselves over willingly." "Then we can't let that happen," Lukas said, his tone sharp. "Stay close. The battle begins." They entered Dunkelwald to find it in chaos. The main street was littered with overturned carts and the bodies of villagers and soldiers alike. The undead surged through the town, clawing at doors and windows as they pursued the terrified townsfolk. Zombies in tattered clothing shambled through the streets, their lifeless eyes glowing faintly. Among them were larger, more monstrous creatures, stitched together abominations of flesh and bone, their twisted forms reeking of decay. "Sigmar protect us," Albrecht muttered as he raised his hammer pendant. Its faint glow gave Hendrik a shred of courage as he followed Lukas into the fray. Lukas moved like a whirlwind, his rapier flashing as he dispatched one zombie after another. He aimed his pistol at a hulking abomination and fired, the silver-tipped bullet tearing through its skull and sending it collapsing to the ground. Albrecht stood at the center of the group, his prayers ringing out as the light of Sigmar repelled the undead, forcing them to hesitate. Hendrik, though no warrior, swung his lantern desperately, the relic's blessed light scattering nearby zombies. He struck one creature across the face, its rotted flesh sizzling as the holy glow burned through it. "Form a line," Lukas shouted to the remaining town guards who were rallying near the town square. "Keep them from flanking us." The guards, The weary and bloodied obeyed, locking their shields together to create a barrier. The villagers who could still fight joined them, wielding pitchforks and makeshift weapons. A desperate defense. The undead pressed forward, their sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm the defenders. Hendrik felt his arms grow heavy as he swung the lantern again and again, the light warding off the attackers but draining his strength. Nearby, Lukas fought with ruthless efficiency, his movements precise and calculated. "We can't hold them forever," Hendrik shouted, his voice hoarse. "We don't need to," Lukas replied, reloading his pistol. "We just need to buy the villagers time to escape." Albrecht stepped forward, his voice rising in a booming prayer. "By Sigmar's light, I banish you." The pendant around his neck blazed with golden light, and a wave of holy energy swept through the street, incinerating the nearest undead. The abominations shrieked and recoiled, but the horde behind them pressed on undeterred. "Fall back to the chapel," Lukas ordered. "It's defensible, and the villagers can take refuge there." The defenders retreated, forming a tight line as they moved toward the small stone chapel at the center of the town. Hendrik helped usher frightened villagers inside, their terrified faces pale and streaked with tears. The chapel holds. The chapel became a fortress, its thick stone walls and narrow windows providing some measure of protection. Lukas and the guards barred the doors, while Hendrik and Albrecht worked to calm the panicked villagers. "We can't keep them out forever," Lukas said, his voice low but steady. "If Nyklas's forces are this organized, it means he's close to his goal. Or worse," Hendrik added, "he's using this as a distraction." Albrecht placed a comforting hand on Hendrik's shoulder. "Whatever his intent, we must trust in Sigmar's light. This is not the time to falter." A sudden crash interrupted them as one of the windows shattered. An abomination forced its way inside, its grotesque form filling the small space. The villagers screamed, but Lukas moved quickly, driving his rapier into the creature's chest. Albrecht raised his hammer pendant, its light flaring brightly as the abomination writhed and crumbled into ash. "They'll keep coming," Lukas said. "We need to find the source of their strength." Nyklas's spies. As the battle raged outside, Hendrik noticed something strange among the villagers. A small group huddled in the corner, whispering to one another. They weren't frightened like the others. They were calm, too calm. One of them, a middle-aged man with a stern face, kept glancing toward the chapel doors, as if waiting for something. Hendrik approached cautiously. "You don't seem worried," he said, his tone probing. "Do you know something we don't?" The man's head snapped toward him, his eyes narrowing. "We're just keeping to ourselves," he said curtly. Hendrik wasn't convinced. "You're waiting for them, aren't you? You're working with Nyklas." The man's expression darkened, and before Hendrik could react, he lunged, a dagger glinting in his hand. Hendrik stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding the blade, as Lukas appeared behind him. The witch hunter fired his pistol, the shot striking the man in the shoulder and sending him to the ground. "Spies," Lukas growled, kicking the dagger away. He glanced at the others in the group, who recoiled under his glare. "How many of you are working with him?" The wounded man sneered, blood trickling from his mouth. "You can't stop him," he rasped. "Nyklas is eternal. You're already too late." Lukas pressed the barrel of his pistol to the man's forehead. "I'll ask once more. How many?" The man laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. "Enough." With a single motion, Lukas pulled the trigger, silencing him. The others in the group were quickly subdued, their betrayal clear. Hendrik felt a wave of nausea as he realized how deeply Nyklas's influence had penetrated. A Pyrrhic victory. By dawn, the undead horde had retreated, their numbers thinning as the rising sun pierced the mist. Dunkelwald was in ruins, its streets littered with the dead and its buildings smoldering from the fires of the battle. The villagers who had survived were battered and broken, their once quiet town reduced to a shadow of itself. Lukas stood in the square, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "This was just the beginning," he said. "Nyklas is testing us, buying himself time. He'll come again, and next time, he'll bring his full strength." Albrecht knelt beside a fallen guard, his lips moving in silent prayer. Hendrik watched as the priest's shoulders sagged with exhaustion, the weight of their task pressing down on all of them. "We stopped him here," Hendrik said, his voice trembling with anger and resolve. "But we can't keep fighting like this. We have to strike at the source." Lukas turned to him, his expression hard. "Then we go to Castle Orlock." As they prepared to leave Dunkelwald, the people watched them with a mixture of hope and fear. The survivors knew the battle was far from over, and that their fate rested in the hands of 3 weary souls. Hendrik glanced back at the ruined town, his resolve hardening. Nyklas's reach had to end, and they were the only ones who could stop it. Chapter 17. The Baron's Secrets. The journey back to Wolfsbach was fraught with tension. The battered survivors of Dunkelwald weighed heavily on their minds, a stark reminder of Nyklas's growing reach. Hendrik, Lukas, and Father Albrecht knew they had little time to act. If they failed, Dunkelwald would be only the beginning. The 3 gathered in the Howling Hound's common room late that night, its flickering hearth providing the only light. Maps and parchment were spread across the table, their edges curling from the fire's warmth. Lukas stood with his arms crossed, his sharp gaze fixed on the crude sketch of Castle Orlock that lay before them. "We can't march through the front gates," Lukas said, his tone blunt. "Even if we had an army, Nyklas would see us coming long before we reached the walls." "Then we need another way in," Hendrik said. "A way he won't expect." "There is one," Father Albrecht said, his voice quiet but firm. "The catacombs." "Legends of the catacombs." Hendrik and Lukas turned to Albrecht, who leaned heavily on his staff, his face shadowed in the firelight. "The catacombs beneath Castle Orlock are older than the castle itself," the priest explained. "They were once part of an ancient crypt, a burial ground for a forgotten order of knights. When the von Carsteins took the castle, they claimed the catacombs as their own." Hendrik frowned. "If they're part of the castle, wouldn't Nyklas know about them?" "Oh, he knows," Albrecht replied. "But the catacombs are vast and dangerous even for him. The ancient wards placed there by the knights still linger, their power fading, but not extinguished. Nyklas may use parts of the catacombs, but there are areas he avoids, areas he cannot fully control." "That's where we'll go," Lukas said, his expression hard. "Through the places even Nyklas fears." "And what's waiting for us there?" Hendrik asked, his voice heavy with doubt. "Spirits, traps, and worse," Albrecht admitted. "But if we can navigate them, we'll find our way into the castle unnoticed." A hidden map. Their discussion was interrupted by the sound of the innkeeper, Otto, shuffling nervously into the room. He carried a bundle wrapped in cloth, his hands trembling as he placed it on the table. "I overheard you talking," Otto said, avoiding their gazes. "This might help." Lukas unwrapped the bundle carefully, revealing an ancient map, its edges frayed and its ink faded with age. The layout of the catacombs was scrawled in meticulous detail, though parts of it were obscured by time and decay. Hendrik leaned forward, studying the map intently. "Where did you get this?" Lukas asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. "It belonged to my grandfather," Otto said. "He was a gravedigger, back when the castle's crypts were still used by the living. He spoke of the catacombs, said they were cursed. But he kept this map, said it might be useful one day." Lukas nodded, his expression softening slightly. "It will be." Hendrik traced a path on the map with his finger. "This passage here," he said, pointing to a section marked with a faint X. "It leads directly beneath the castle." "Straight into the crypts," Albrecht said, his voice heavy with meaning. "The Soulstone will be close. Nyklas wouldn't let it stray far from his reach." The plan takes shape. Lukas tapped the map with his gloved hand. "We follow this route," he said. "Through the catacombs, into the crypts, and to the Soulstone. Albrecht will carry the lantern of sanctity to keep the spirits at bay. Hendrik, you'll document everything. You're the only one who can decipher the symbols and words we'll encounter." "And what about you?" Hendrik asked. "I'll keep us alive," Lukas said, his voice devoid of humor. Hendrik glanced at the map again, a knot forming in his stomach. "Even with the lantern, this is a dangerous gamble." "All of this is a gamble," Lukas replied sharply. "But it's the only chance we have. If we wait, Nyklas's power will grow beyond our ability to stop him." Hendrik nodded reluctantly. "Then we'll need to prepare." "Preparations for the journey." The following day was spent gathering supplies. Albrecht blessed vials of holy water, their faint glow a reminder of Sigmar's protection. Lukas sharpened his weapons and ensured his pistol was loaded with silver-tipped bullets. Hendrik packed his satchel with maps, journals, and a small vial of ink, his tools as a scholar becoming his armor for the coming trials. The villagers watched them warily, their fear palpable. Whispers of their plans spread quickly, and while some offered quiet prayers, others averted their eyes, as if afraid to acknowledge the danger that surrounded them. That evening, as the sun set behind the jagged peaks of Sylvania, the trio stood at the edge of the forest. The path to the catacombs lay ahead, a narrow trail winding through dense trees and overgrown underbrush. "Once we enter," Lukas said, his voice low, "there's no turning back." Hendrik felt the weight of his satchel against his shoulder and the chill of the lantern in his hand. "We're as ready as we'll ever be." Albrecht raised his hammer pendant, its faint light cutting through the gloom. "Then may Sigmar's light guide us." Together they stepped into the shadows, the path ahead shrouded in darkness. The catacombs awaited, a labyrinth of secrets and danger, and the only path to Nyklas von Carstein's undoing. Chapter 18. The First Assault. The entrance to the catacombs yawned like the mouth of a great beast, hidden beneath an overgrown thicket of vines and rubble. Hendrik hesitated as he stared into the dark passage, its cold breath brushing his face. Behind him, Lukas Dietrich adjusted his pistol, his sharp eyes scanning their surroundings, while Father Albrecht whispered a prayer, the lantern of sanctity glowing faintly in his hand. "This is it," Lukas said grimly, motioning for the group to move forward. "Stay close. The lantern's light will keep the spirits at bay, but it won't save us from everything." Hendrik swallowed his apprehension and stepped into the darkness, the others close behind. The air grew colder as they descended, the walls slick with damp moss. The silence was oppressive, broken only by their muffled footsteps and the occasional drip of water echoing from the depths. Entering the castle. The catacombs were a labyrinth of ancient stone corridors, their walls etched with faded runes and carvings. Hendrik paused occasionally to study the markings, scribbling notes into his journal. Each step brought them closer to Castle Orlock, the weight of its looming presence pressing down even from beneath its foundations. After what felt like hours of navigating the winding tunnels, they emerged into a small chamber. Above them, a spiral staircase wound its way upward, disappearing into the shadows. "This will take us into the castle," Albrecht whispered. "The crypts should be just beyond." Lukas nodded and led the way, his steps careful but swift. As they ascended, the oppressive silence was replaced by faint, echoing noises, the scrape of metal, distant whispers, and the hollow sound of footsteps. "We're not alone," Lukas said, his voice low. "Be ready." The ambush. They entered the crypts cautiously, the air thick with the stench of decay. Rows of stone sarcophagi lined the walls, their lids adorned with the effigies of long-dead nobles. The faint light of the lantern illuminated the chamber, casting eerie shadows across the vaulted ceiling. As they moved deeper, Hendrik noticed a faint, pulsating glow emanating from the far end of the crypt. It was a cold, unnatural light, and he felt an involuntary shiver run down his spine. "The Soulstone," Albrecht murmured, his eyes narrowing. "It must be near." Before they could move closer, a chilling voice echoed through the chamber. "So the hunters have come to play." The group spun around as a figure stepped from the shadows. Lady Irina, Nyklas's consort, was a vision of unnatural beauty, her pale skin luminescent in the lantern's glow. Her red lips curled into a cruel smile, and her eyes gleamed with malice. "You've strayed far from the light of Sigmar," she said, her voice dripping with mockery. "Did you think you could enter my lord's domain unchallenged?" Lukas raised his pistol. "Step aside, or I'll send you back to the grave." Irina laughed, a sound that sent chills through Hendrik. "You're bold, witch hunter. But this is my home, and you are nothing but prey." At her command, the sarcophagi lining the walls began to shift. The lids groaned as they slid open, and undead knights emerged, their rusted armor clanking as they drew their ancient weapons. Their empty eyes glowed faintly, and the air filled with the smell of rot and the faint whisper of unholy magic. The battle. The knights charged, their movements jerky but swift. Lukas fired his pistol, the silver-tipped bullet striking one knight square in the chest and sending it crashing to the ground. He drew his rapier and lunged at another, his blade slicing through its brittle armor with precision. Albrecht raised the lantern of sanctity, its holy light flaring brightly. The undead recoiled, their forms flickering as if caught between two worlds. The priest began chanting a prayer, his voice steady and resolute. Hendrik swung the lantern desperately, using its light to keep the knights at bay. His heart pounded as he narrowly avoided a sword strike, the blade slicing through the air just inches from his head. Irina watched the chaos with an amused smirk before stepping forward. "Enough of this," she said, raising a hand. Dark energy swirled around her fingers, and with a flick of her wrist, she sent a wave of necrotic magic hurtling toward them. The blast struck the group, sending them sprawling. Hendrik's lantern rolled from his grasp, its light dimming as it skittered across the floor. He scrambled to retrieve it, his fingers brushing against the cold metal as Irina advanced. "You're outmatched," she hissed, her eyes glowing with malice. "You cannot hope to defeat us." Lukas staggered to his feet, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead. "We'll see about that." The discovery. Amid the chaos, Hendrik's eyes caught something beyond Irina, a faintly glowing pedestal tucked into a recess in the far wall. Atop it sat a jagged, black crystal pulsating with an eerie, otherworldly light. "The Soulstone," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Albrecht followed his gaze and nodded. "We found it." "Good," Lukas said, slashing at another knight. "Now we get out of here before we're overrun." Albrecht grabbed the lantern and raised it high, its holy light blazing to life once more. The undead knights faltered, their movements slowing as the power of Sigmar pushed them back. Irina snarled, shielding her eyes from the light. "Fools," she shrieked. "You will not escape." But the group was already retreating, their path illuminated by the lantern's glow. Hendrik glanced back once, locking eyes with Irina. Her face was twisted with rage, but there was something else in her gaze, a flicker of fear. A narrow escape. They fled back through the crypts, their footsteps echoing as the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. By the time they reached the catacombs, they were breathless and battered but alive. "We found it," Hendrik said, his voice shaking. "The Soulstone is real." "And now we know where it is," Lukas said. "But getting to it will be another matter." Albrecht nodded, his face pale but determined. "The Soulstone is protected by dark magic. We'll need more than faith and steel to destroy it." Hendrik looked back toward the crypt. The memory of Irina's piercing gaze burned into his mind. The Soulstone was within reach, but the cost of retrieving it, and the horrors they would face, was a weight none of them could ignore. "We'll be ready," Hendrik said, though his words felt hollow. "We have to be." As they emerged into the cold night air, the silhouette of Castle Orlock loomed above them, its jagged spires cutting into the starless sky. The first assault had failed, but the war was far from over. Chapter 19. Division in the Ranks. The small fire crackled in the clearing near the edge of the Wyrdwood, casting long, flickering shadows on the forest floor. The trio had retreated far enough from Castle Orlock to avoid pursuit, but the tension between them was palpable. Exhaustion etched deep lines into their faces, and the weight of the failed assault pressed heavily on their shoulders. Lukas Dietrich sat apart from the others, his wide-brimmed hat resting on the ground beside him. He meticulously cleaned his pistol, each deliberate motion betraying the simmering frustration beneath his calm exterior. Father Albrecht knelt near the fire, murmuring prayers of thanks for their survival. Hendrik sat on a fallen log, staring into the flames, his thoughts churning with doubt. The silence stretched unbearably before Lukas spoke, his voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. "That was a disaster." "We made it out alive," Hendrik replied, not looking up. "That counts for something." "Alive?" "Yes," Lukas said sharply, "but empty-handed. The Soulstone is still in Nyklas's hands, and now he knows we're coming." "We confirmed its location," Hendrik argued. "That's not nothing." Lukas turned to him, his eyes hard. You think knowledge will stop Nyklas? You think the Empire will care that you scribbled some notes in your journal when the undead march on Altdorf? Hendrik's jaw tightened. I'm trying to help. Maybe if you weren't so. So what? Lukas interrupted, rising to his feet. So focused? So uncompromising? Someone has to be. You're so busy questioning everything that you can't see the simple truth. Nyklas is a monster, and the only way to stop him is to destroy him. Clashing beliefs. Father Albrecht stepped between them, his voice firm but calm. Enough. We're on the same side. Are we? Lukas said, his gaze fixed on Hendrik. He doesn't even believe in the mission. He's just a scholar, dabbling in matters far beyond his understanding. That's not fair, Albrecht said. Hendrik has done his part. Without him, we wouldn't have even found the Soulstone. Without me, Lukas shot back, you'd both be dead. Hendrik stood abruptly, the tension boiling over. I never claimed to be a warrior, Lukas. I'm here because the church sent me. But maybe they were wrong. Maybe this isn't about faith. It's about survival. Faith is survival, Lukas snapped. Without Sigmar's light, we're nothing but prey for Nyklas and his kind. Hendrik's fists clenched at his sides. And what if Sigmar's light isn't enough? What if we need more than prayers and relics? What then, Lukas? Will you still cling to your doctrine while the world burns? The witch hunter's hand twitched toward his rapier, but he stopped himself, his expression a mask of cold anger. If you've lost your faith, that's your weakness. Don't make it mine. Hendrik's doubts. The confrontation ended as abruptly as it began, with Lukas stalking away to the edge of the clearing. Father Albrecht watched him go before turning to Hendrik, his weathered face filled with concern. You shouldn't antagonize him, Albrecht said softly. Lukas has his ways, but his heart is true. Hendrik sank back onto the log, running a hand through his hair. I'm not trying to antagonize him. I'm trying to make sense of all this. You're questioning your faith, Albrecht said, sitting beside him. Hendrik hesitated before nodding. How can I not? I've seen things in these last few days that defy everything I thought I understood. I've prayed, I've studied, but nothing I've learned has prepared me for this. Faith isn't about understanding, Albrecht said. It's about trust. Trust that Sigmar's light will guide us, even when the path is dark. That's easy for you to say, Hendrik replied. You've devoted your life to the church. But I'm just me. A scholar. I was sent here to observe, to document. I wasn't prepared for a war against the undead. None of us were prepared, Albrecht said, his voice tinged with sadness. But here we are, and we can either stand together or fall apart. Hendrik stared into the fire, its flickering light mirrored in his eyes. I don't know if I believe anymore, Albrecht. In Sigmar, in the church, in any of it. The priest placed a hand on Hendrik's shoulder. Faith is not a constant, Hendrik. It ebbs and flows, like the tides. But even the smallest ember can ignite a fire. Don't let doubt consume you. A tenuous peace. The night passed in uneasy silence, the fire crackling softly as the trio rested. Hendrik tried to sleep, but his mind was restless, filled with visions of Nyklas, the Soulstone, and the horrors they had faced. When dawn broke, pale and gray, Lukas was already preparing to leave, his movements brisk and efficient. We move at first light, Lukas said curtly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Hendrik nodded, his earlier anger replaced by exhaustion. Father Albrecht stood between them, his calming presence a fragile bridge over the widening chasm of mistrust. As they gathered their supplies and prepared to re-enter the catacombs, Hendrik couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle wasn't just against Nyklas and his undead army. It was against the cracks forming in their fragile alliance, and the doubt threatening to consume his soul. Chapter 20. The Final Plan. The air in the small, dimly lit chamber beneath the howling hound was thick with tension. The trio had retreated here after their near-disastrous foray into Castle Orlock, their failures in fraying trust weighing heavily on them. The wooden table in the center of the room bore the crumpled map of the catacombs, alongside vials of holy water, blessed silver weapons, and the faintly glowing lantern of sanctity. Father Albrecht stood at the head of the table, his face shadowed and lined with exhaustion. He clutched his hammer pendant tightly, as though drawing strength from it. Lukas Dietrich leaned against the far wall, his arms crossed and his expression cold. Hendrik sat quietly, a quill in his hand, poised above his journal but unmoving. "This is not just about reaching the Soulstone," Albrecht began, breaking the silence. "It's about destroying it, and that will not be as simple as striking it with a weapon." Hendrik looked up, frowning. "Why not? The hammer you gave us, the one blessed by Sigmar, should be enough." "It won't be," Albrecht said, his voice heavy with certainty. "The Soulstone is an artifact of immense power, a relic tied to the very origins of vampirism. It cannot be destroyed by brute force alone. To break its connection to the mortal world, we must purify it at a place where Sigmar's light still lingers." "And where, exactly, do we find such a place?" Lukas asked, his tone laced with skepticism. "Castle Orlock isn't exactly known for its sanctity." "There is one place," Albrecht said, "the crypt of Sigmar, hidden deep beneath the castle." "The crypt of Sigmar." "The crypt of Sigmar?" Hendrik repeated, flipping through his notes. "I've never heard of it." "Few have," Albrecht replied. "It predates even the founding of Castle Orlock. Long before the von Carsteins claimed this land, a small order of Sigmarite knights established a shrine here. They believed this place was a site of great spiritual significance, blessed by Sigmar himself." "And what happened to them?" Lukas asked. "They were slaughtered when the von Carsteins rose to power," Albrecht said grimly. "But their crypts remain. The legends say their final resting place is still protected by the blessings of Sigmar, untouched by the darkness that now surrounds it." Hendrik leaned forward. "If the crypt is so well protected, how can we access it?" "That," Albrecht admitted, "will be the greatest challenge. The crypt lies beneath the deepest levels of Castle Orlock, beyond even the catacombs. It is said to be hidden behind wards and ancient seals, guarded by both the spirits of the knights and whatever horrors Nyklas has placed in our path." "Wonderful," Lukas muttered. "So we fight through undead knights, break ancient seals, and hope the crypt is still intact. Anything else?" "Yes," Albrecht said solemnly. "We must perform the rite of purification." "The rite of purification." "The rite is a sacred ritual," Albrecht explained. "It requires the recitation of specific prayers, the anointing of the Soulstone with holy water, and the use of the lantern of sanctity to focus Sigmar's light upon it. Only then can the Soulstone's power be severed." "And who performs this ritual?" Hendrik asked, his voice tinged with unease. "I will," Albrecht said. "As a priest of Sigmar, it is my duty. But the rite will take time, and I cannot complete it alone. You must protect me while I perform it." Hendrik exchanged a worried glance with Lukas. "How long are we talking?" "Minutes," Albrecht replied. "But against Nyklas and his forces, even seconds will feel like an eternity." Lukas straightened, his expression hardening. "If that's what it takes, then we'll make it happen. But we need a solid plan, no improvisation." The plan takes shape. The trio pored over the map of the catacombs, tracing the route they would need to take. Hendrik pointed to a section marked with faded runes. "This passage here, it should lead us close to the crypt. But these markings suggest traps, or possibly magical wards." "We'll use the lantern to dispel the wards," Albrecht said. "But we'll need to be cautious. The closer we get to the crypt, the more resistance we'll face." "And once we're inside?" Lukas asked. "We secure the area and begin the rite," Albrecht said. "The crypt's blessing should weaken Nyklas's forces, but he will come for us. We must hold the line until the ritual is complete." Hendrik frowned. "And what about the Soulstone itself? What happens when it's destroyed?" Albrecht hesitated, his eyes darkening. "The Soulstone's destruction will release a surge of energy. It will break Nyklas's hold over the land, but it will also unleash chaos. We must be prepared for the consequences." "Great," Lukas said dryly. "So we might not survive, even if we succeed." Albrecht nodded. "Sigmar's work is not without sacrifice." Tensions resurface. As they finalized the plan, The lingering tension between Hendrik and Lukas flared again. "This is madness," Hendrik said, shaking his head. "We're betting everything on a legend, a crypt that might not even exist." "And what's your alternative?" Lukas snapped. "Sit here and wait for Nyklas to march on the Empire." "I'm saying we need to be smarter," Hendrik retorted. "Charging headfirst into the lion's den isn't bravery, it's suicide." "It's duty," Lukas said coldly. "Something you clearly don't understand." "Enough," Albrecht interjected, his voice firm. "We don't have time for this. Nyklas's power grows stronger with every moment we delay. If we don't act now, there won't be a chance later." The room fell silent, the crackling fire the only sound. Hendrik exhaled slowly, his frustration giving way to resignation. "Fine," he said. "Let's do this." A final resolve. As the first light of dawn broke over the jagged peaks of Sylvania, the trio prepared to set out for Castle Orlock. The plan was dangerous, their chances slim, but their resolve was unshakable. They would infiltrate the castle, find the crypt of Sigmar, and destroy the Soulstone, no matter the cost. Standing at the edge of the forest, Hendrik glanced back at the village of Wolfsback, its crumbling buildings bathed in pale light. The people there placed their hope in them. And for the first time, Hendrik felt the weight of that hope pressing on his shoulders. "Sigmar willing," Albrecht said, holding the lantern high, "we will see this through." "And if he's not willing?" Hendrik muttered. Lukas adjusted his hat and drew his rapier. "Then we make him proud." With that, they stepped into the shadow of Castle Orlock, the final leg of their journey beginning beneath the watchful gaze of its jagged spires.